One of Australia's major organized crime figures, bikie boss Felix Lyle, has died last year, in 2023. About 6 months later, new shocking details surfaced about his death and his criminal past that will change the bikie world. Kiwi-born Felix Lyle, or Big F as he was known, started out as a bouncer dubbed Buffalo at the notorious King's Cross Bar Bourbon and Beefsteak in Sydney before joining the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. In 2002, Lyle was ousted as the head of the Sydney's most powerful branch of the Bandidos. But his top position at the Bandidos didn't last long. He was expelled 4 years later by his successor Rodney "Hooks" Monk for not being of good character. This was caused by Monk's feud with Lyle, related to the theft of $2 million worth of pseudoephedrine from Milad Sande, a major drug distributor and Bandidos associate who was shot dead during a robbery. This created a major headache for Monk, as Sandy had his own high-powered connections in the Bandidos. Police sources claimed Monk was behind the subsequent kidnapping and torture of Fitzgerald over his role in stealing Sandy's drugs. Lyle and his son were also forced to hand over a substantial amount of money. In 2006, not long after the kidnapping, Monk was murdered by one of Lyle's protégés, Russell Oldham. But it all didn't stop there. Felix Lyle was the true crime kingpin. After forcefully leaving the Bandidos, he became head of a Sydney chapter of the Hells Angels after his predecessor was jailed for killing a rival during a brawl at Sydney Airport. But this wasn't his only conviction. As one of Australia's most notorious crime figures, Felix Lyle had a pretty impressive crime record. He had been serving a 4-year prison term for fraud, supplying a large commercial quantity of drugs, and dealing with the proceeds of crime. He later was also jailed for killing a rival during the well-known brawl at Sydney Airport. But how will all of this change the bikie world? Well, it's time for a new era. In March 2013, only a month after he was jailed for fraud and drug offenses, Lyle was arrested over his role in attempting to supply 50 black market Glock pistols, but the charges were later dropped. Another of those arrested with Lyle was high-ranking Comanchero Kamel Blackie Barakat. Police alleged the rival bikie gangs had gone into the drug business together. Barakat, who remained on good terms with Lyle, was shot multiple times in his Mortlake apartment last week. It is understood that a notable absence on the visitors' register at Villawood is Lyle's son, Fitzgerald. Sources told the Sydney Morning Herald that Fitzgerald, who was jailed over his role in the audacious Ocean's 11-style attempted theft of $150 million from J.P. Morgan, is on the run over other drug rip-offs he was involved in with the recently murdered mafia figure Pasquale Barbaro. Although Fitzgerald was rumored to have been promoted to National Sergeant-at-Arms, or the enforcer of the Hells Angels, one of his former associates quipped that Malvern Star is the only bike outfit which currently would have him. A spokesman from Australia's Department of Immigration and Border Protection refused to comment on Lyle's prospective deportation, but said, "We remain committed to protecting the Australian community from those involved in serious and significant criminal activity, including outlaw motorcycle gangs." Lyle had been spending a lot of time in Asia, especially in the Philippines, since his deportation from Australia in 2017. In 2001, Lyle was charged and later acquitted with manufacturing speed, but the NSW Crime Commission, using proceeds of crime legislation, confiscated millions of dollars worth of Lyle's property, including flats in the exclusive harbourside suburb of Double Bay and the Bandidos HQ in Pyrmont. In 2011, when Lyle was arrested over fraud charges, he had trouble getting bail because he couldn't find a friend without a criminal record to put up bail. Just as Lyle finally found a suitable person to lodge bail, he was arrested again. Lyle was charged with trying to extort $120,000 from a luxury car dealer, Terry Mullins. While those charges were later dropped, in 2012, he was convicted of 2 counts of dishonestly obtaining financial advantage by deception and 1 count of knowingly dealing with crime proceeds. Court documents showed the bikie boss convinced vulnerable people to become directors of shelf companies. Lyle and his co-accused, Terrence Reddy, nicknamed the Black Prince, had forged financial documents in the names of these directors and the shelf companies, which were then used to apply for loans. Lyle was always a contradiction. Although the head of a bikie gang, Lyle was not often seen on a bike himself. Before his time in jail in 2012, Lyle, who was bankrupt and had lost his driver's license, was chauffeured around in his bright red Bentley, the boot of which was used as a portable ATM, dispensing substantial amounts of cash. Despite his fearsome reputation and the fact that he had clawed his way to the top of an organization crammed with a host of questionable, violent characters, Lyle was regarded as funny and charming. Was this his secret power to get away with the majority of his crimes? His friend James "Big Jim" Burns, a colorful Sydney business identity, said, "I've never seen him threaten anyone." Instead, said Burns, Lyle conducted his negotiations with a sense of humor and with rat-cunning charm. Asked what Lyle did for a living, Burns said his friend's biggest strength was his connections. He would make a quid from introducing bloke A to bloke B, said Burns. The connections Lyle made during his years at the Cross saw him rise through the ranks of organized crime. Felix Lyle dodged several bullets during his years within the criminal underworld, the Bandidos, and later the Hells Angels, but he wasn't able to beat cancer. Lyle had moved to Russia 6 months earlier for cancer treatment and was living with his son Dallas Fitzgerald, also a Hells Angel member, who fled Australia for Russia following a spate of murders, including that of his close associate Pasquale Barbaro. Both men decided to take a step back from the criminal underworld to focus on Felix Lyle. But in August 2023, the crime kingpin Big F, Felix Lyle, died in Russia of cancer. With his death, one of the most notorious criminals in Australia is no longer, but there are still questions lingering in the air. What now? What is next? Will his son step into his father's shoes? Or will a new contender emerge to claim the throne of the Australian bikie world? The absence of Big F has now created a void that leaves room for speculation and uncertainty. The bikie world now faces a crossroad, a potential turning point, a change for law enforcement to tighten the grip on outlaw motorcycle clubs. But it may also herald a new era for rival factions within the bikie community, each vying for supremacy. The rat-cunning charm that defined his negotiations might be replaced by a more brutal and cutthroat approach, or perhaps a leader will emerge who can navigate the criminal underworld with a different approach. Whatever the future holds, the demise of Big F has cast a long shadow over the Australian bikie world, leaving an indelible mark on its history and signaling the beginning of a new chapter, one that is still shrouded in uncertainty and intrigue. What will the future hold? Who will anyone follow in his footsteps? Time will tell.